Hey guys, Aaron here. Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to replace a lower control arm assembly on a 2015 and newer Ford F-150. Now this particular truck's a 2015 XLT two-wheel drive, and we're getting a little bit of play on the front lower driver's side ball joint. Now we can press a new ball joint into the existing control arm, that is an option. However, due to the age of the vehicle and how many miles it has, I'm going to go ahead and replace the whole assembly because we're going to be getting some newer lower control arm bushings along with that. With all that said, let's go ahead and go over the parts and tools we're going to need to get the job done. So as far as tools go, we'll need a 21mm open end wrench, a 27mm open end wrench. We'll also need an 18mm socket, 21mm socket, and a 27mm socket. We're also going to need a torque wrench, the appropriate ratchet for the sockets, and a large mallet. One other thing to consider is you may want to install a Camber Caster adjustment bolt kit. These trucks do not come with cammed alignment bolts, so they can be kind of difficult to align. And with this kit, it really makes it easy, and you can get a lot of degrees out of your camber and caster. So if you have a lift or you have a kind of a severe pulling to one side or the other, this kit's definitely going to help you out. You will have to drill into the frame for the rear bolts. These bolts are two different lengths. The front bolts are a little bit longer than the rear, and you will have to drill a 5/16 hole into the frame to put these little shims in and install them that way. So I won't be doing it on this truck today, but just something to keep in mind if you do have a lifted truck or you have a hard time aligning your truck. This is something that you may want to do. And of course, we're gonna need a brand new control arm. One thing to keep in mind is that 2015 is a split year. So if your vehicle is manufactured before February of 2015, you're gonna need a different part number than if your truck was manufactured after February of 2015. I'll go ahead and throw links in the description so you can go ahead and select the part that you need and purchase the part online if you choose, just like I did. Okay, so here we are underneath the vehicle, and the vehicle is jacked up with the tire off. What we're gonna need to do first is disconnect the sway bar link from the lower control arm. And we're gonna be doing that using an 18mm socket. After that's complete, we're gonna need to remove the two nuts that attach the shock absorber to the lower control arm. As you can see, I have an aftermarket shock here, so I'm actually gonna be removing some bolts. However, if you have the stock shock, you're gonna be using an 18mm socket just to remove the two nuts, and the studs are gonna stay in the shock absorber. All right, once that's complete, we can go ahead and remove the nut that's on the lower control arm ball joint. Okay, so next we need to remove the lower ball joint from the spindle here. It is pressed in, so first thing I'm gonna do is take a large mallet and I'm gonna try to strike the side of the spindle, which should free it up. If that doesn't work, we could use a pickle fork right here and put it in between the lower control arm and the spindle, and that should drive it upwards. And if that doesn't work, we can use a ball joint separator and remove the ball joint that way. All right, now the next step is to remove the lower control arm bolts out of the frame. I'm gonna be using a 21mm socket to hold the bolt, and I'm gonna be using a 27mm socket to remove the nut. Now, as you can see, the rear bolts are blocked by the sway bar. We can remove the four nuts from the frame using a 15mm socket and drop the sway bar down. I'm gonna go ahead and just use an open end wrench to get this nut off. All right, so as you can see here, as we removed the two bolts, the lower ball joint just kind of fell down. We're gonna go ahead and remove it from the vehicle and install the new one. Now, as you can see, I kind of have everything loosely in place. I'm going to go ahead and put in my lower control arm bolts, then continue to tighten everything down to spec. I'm going to go ahead and include all the torque specs in the description if you want to follow along with those. It is important to note that we do need to torque the lower control arm bolts down to 258 foot-pounds. We're gonna have to do that when the suspension is loaded, meaning when the vehicle is on the ground. So right now, the suspension is unloaded and the lower control arm is in the lowest position. If we torque down the lower bolts and then put the vehicle on the ground, it's gonna put a lot of unneeded stress on the lower control arm bushings, which we don't wanna do. Okay, so everything's bolted up, and the last step is to properly torque down the lower control arm bolts. These lower control arm bolts take 258 foot-pounds to torque them down completely, and we need to do that when the suspension is loaded or when the vehicle is on the ground. One little trick that I have is I take a floor jack and I put it underneath the lower control arm and I lift it up until the vehicle starts to lift up from the lower control arm. And that's just going to simulate the wheel on the ground, and it's a little bit easier to get a lot of torque on those lower control arm bolts when the tire is off. All right, guys, went ahead and torqued everything down, and now it's time to go ahead and bring the vehicle into the alignment shop to get it aligned. So that pretty much concludes this video. Hope this video has helped you out. If it has, please like and subscribe. Make sure to check out the links in the description for the parts and tools I used during this video. Thanks again as always, guys. See you next time.